The first person to accuse Victoria Hayes of destroying her family wasn't her husband. It was her own daughter. "I don't even recognize you anymore." I froze with a basket of clean towels in my hands. The argument was coming from the second floor. I wasn't trying to listen. The voices were simply too loud to ignore. "You lied to all of us," Lily shouted. "I never lied to you," Victoria answered. Her voice was calm, too calm. "I saw the pictures. They don't tell the whole story. They tell enough." The bedroom door flew open. Lily stormed into the hallway. She walked right past me without even noticing I was there. Her cheeks were wet with tears. She looked furious. A few seconds later, Victoria stepped out of the bedroom. She didn't chase after her daughter. She didn't defend herself. She simply stood there, staring at the floor. Then, so quietly I almost missed it, she whispered, "I've already lost them." That sentence stayed with me for the rest of the day. Because guilty people usually fight. They explain, they deny. Victoria did none of those things. She looked like someone who had already accepted that no one would believe her. At that moment, I knew almost nothing about the Hayes family. I had only been working there for 2 weeks, long enough to learn everyone's routine, not long enough to understand what was really happening. The Hayes family was exactly the kind of family people admired. Charles Hayes was one of Boston's most successful attorneys. He represented wealthy clients, politicians, and large corporations. His reputation was spotless. People trusted him. His wife, Victoria, spent most of her time running charity events and fundraising for children's hospitals. Their son, Ethan, had recently started working at Charles' law firm. Their daughter, Lily, had just returned home after her first year at college. They lived in a beautiful lakefront mansion where every room looked like it belonged in a magazine. Nothing appeared out of place. Nothing suggested their family was falling apart. "My name is Emma Brooks. I'm 46 years old. 5 years ago, after my divorce, I started working as a housekeeper. At first, I thought I would do it for a few months. Instead, I discovered something unexpected. People rarely notice the person vacuuming their floors. That makes a housekeeper almost invisible, and invisible people often hear the truth before anyone else does. During my first week at the Hayes residence, Charles impressed everyone. He greeted every employee by name. He always smiled, always asked how our day was going, always thanked us before leaving for work. If someone had asked me then who seemed more trustworthy, I wouldn't have hesitated. Charles. Victoria was polite, kind, but distant. She often looked distracted. Sometimes I found untouched cups of coffee sitting beside her. Other times she would stare through the windows overlooking the lake for several minutes without moving. She wasn't cold, she was somewhere else. Like her mind was carrying a weight no one else could see. A few days before I heard Lily accuse her, I stopped at a small coffee shop on my way to work. Two women were talking at the next table. I wasn't paying attention until I heard a familiar name. Poor Charles. "I still can't believe what Victoria did. They say she's been seeing another man for months." The second woman nodded. "My sister works with one of Charles' associates. Everyone at the firm knows." I remember thinking how strange that sounded, because in the days I'd spent inside that house, I had never seen anything unusual about Victoria. She left every morning around 9, usually for meetings connected to her charity. She returned before dinner almost every evening. She spent most nights reading in the living room or helping Lily plan a fundraising event. Nothing about her routine matched the rumors. Charles, however, had a very different schedule. He rarely came home before 8. Sometimes it was 10, sometimes even later. Every explanation sounded the same. Client dinner, emergency meeting, late hearing. No one questioned him, not Victoria, not Ethan, not Lily. Everyone accepted his answers without hesitation. Then something happened that made me question everything I thought I understood. The following Monday, I was cleaning Charles's home office while he was away at work. His desk was perfectly organized, legal files stacked neatly, family photographs arranged in silver frames. As I dusted one corner of the desk, his office phone lit up. A message appeared on the screen. I wasn't trying to read it, but one sentence caught my eye before the display went dark. "Same hotel, tomorrow. Don't let Victoria know." I stood completely still. At first, I assumed I had misunderstood. After all, everyone in town believed Victoria was the unfaithful one. So why was Charles hiding meetings from his own wife? And why did I suddenly have the feeling that the entire town had been blaming the wrong person? I told myself to forget the message. People receive private texts every day, lawyers especially. Maybe it was about a client. Maybe "don't let Victoria know" had nothing to do with an affair. But the words stayed with me. The next morning, I arrived at the Hayes house just before 8. Charles had already left. Victoria was in the kitchen, standing in front of the coffee machine. She looked tired, not like someone who hadn't slept, like someone who had spent the entire night thinking. "Good morning, Emma," she said with a small smile. "Good morning." She poured herself a cup of coffee, then another. She took one sip from the first cup and left both sitting on the counter. Half an hour later, they were still there, untouched. She had forgotten them, not because she was absent-minded, because her mind was somewhere else. Around noon, I was changing the sheets in the master bedroom when I heard voices outside. Victoria was speaking on the phone. "I can't keep pretending." Silence. "I know." Another pause. "I just want my children back." She ended the call before I heard anything else. That sentence didn't sound like a woman hiding an affair. It sounded like someone losing her family. Later that afternoon, Ethan came home early from work. He walked straight into his father's office. About 20 minutes later, Charles arrived. The study door closed behind them. Normally, I ignored conversations. That day, I couldn't. Their voices carried through the hallway. "I don't understand why she's still denying it," Ethan said. Charles answered calmly. "Because people like your mother never admit the truth. What if she's lying to all of us?" Charles sighed. "I've tried to protect you for months." A long silence followed. Then Ethan asked the question that made my stomach tighten. "Do you think we should tell Lily everything?" Charles didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "When the time is right." I stepped away from the hallway. Something about that conversation felt rehearsed. Charles never sounded emotional, not even when discussing his own marriage. Every sentence was measured, every pause perfectly timed, almost like he had practiced them. That evening, Victoria knocked on Ethan's bedroom door. I happened to be dusting the hallway. "I made your favorite dinner," she said. "We don't need to talk. I just wanted us to eat together." Ethan didn't even open the door. "I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten all day. I'm fine." Victoria stood there for several seconds. "I love you." No answer came from inside the room. She quietly walked downstairs. I had seen heartbreak before. This looked different. It looked like someone being erased from her own family. The following Friday, I was assigned to organize several closets before guests arrived for a charity dinner. One of them belonged to Victoria. Everything inside was perfectly arranged. Dresses grouped by color, shoes lined up neatly, jewelry boxes stacked on the top shelf. Nothing unusual. Until I noticed a small envelope tucked inside a drawer. It had fallen behind a stack of scarves. I picked it up to place it back. A photograph slipped onto the floor. I froze. Victoria was standing beside a man I'd never seen before. He had one arm around her shoulders. They were smiling. For a second, I understood why people believed the rumors. Then I turned the photograph over. Written on the back were 5 words. "Happy birthday, little sister. Love, Michael." Little sister. I looked at the picture again. The resemblance was obvious now. The same eyes, the same smile, the same dark hair. This wasn't a secret lover. It was her brother. Someone had taken that photograph, removed the handwritten message, and shown only the front. Anyone who saw it would reach the same conclusion. A man with his arm around Victoria, standing close together, smiling. It looked exactly like an affair. Unless you knew the truth, I carefully returned the photograph to the envelope. My heart was beating faster now, because this wasn't gossip anymore. Someone had deliberately changed the story. That evening, another strange thing happened. Charles hosted several business associates for dinner. The guests filled the dining room with laughter. Wine flowed. Everyone admired the beautiful house. At one point, one of the guests smiled at Charles. "I don't know how you've stayed so strong." Charles lowered his head modestly. "You do what you have to do for your family." Another guest shook his head. "Most men would have divorced her already." Charles gave a sad smile. "I made promises when we got married." The table fell silent for a moment. Several people looked sympathetically toward him. Victoria sat only a few feet away. No one looked at her. No one asked for her side of the story. No one even spoke to her. She quietly finished dinner, excused herself, and walked upstairs alone. Charles watched her leave, then slowly turned back toward his guests. "I still hope she finds peace." Everyone nodded. They believed every word. So did I, until I noticed something that Charles hadn't expected anyone to see. As the guests prepared to leave, one woman hugged him goodbye. She whispered something so softly that almost no one could hear it. But I did. Rebecca already finished the files. Charles nodded without changing his expression. Good. We'll use them next week. Files. What files? And who was Rebecca? The next Tuesday, I was about to find out. And once I met Rebecca Collins, nothing about the Hayes family would make sense anymore. The name Rebecca Collins stayed in my mind all weekend. Who was she? Why was Charles collecting files? And why did he need them next week? The following Monday, I finally met her. I was polishing the windows in the front hallway when a black sedan pulled into the driveway. A woman stepped out. She looked confident, professional, dark blazer, leather briefcase, no unnecessary jewelry. She wasn't dressed like someone having an affair. She looked like someone arriving for work. Charles greeted her at the front door himself. Rebecca, right on time. They walked directly into his office. The door closed. 2 hours later, she left carrying the same briefcase. Charles walked her to the car. He smiled. But it wasn't the smile people saw at charity dinners. It was business, nothing more. That afternoon, I asked one of the gardeners if he knew who Rebecca was. He shrugged. I've seen her here a few times. Lawyer? I don't think so. Maybe an investigator. That word stayed with me. Investigator. A week later, I got my answer. Charles had forgotten his tablet on the kitchen island before leaving for work. I wasn't interested in it. I simply moved it aside to wipe the counter. The screen lit up. A notification appeared. Rebecca Collins, surveillance report, week 11. I looked away immediately, but it was too late. I had already seen the title. Surveillance, not legal documents, not business contracts. Surveillance. Who was being watched? That afternoon, Victoria returned home carrying several shopping bags. She looked distracted. While putting groceries away, she suddenly asked me, Emma, can I ask you something? Of course. She hesitated, then quietly said, Have you ever felt like people stop believing you before you've even spoken? I didn't answer immediately. She wasn't really asking for advice. She was asking if someone understood. I think that happens more often than people admit. She smiled sadly. I keep trying to explain myself. She looked down at the kitchen counter. But every conversation starts with people assuming I'm lying. Before I could respond, Charles walked into the room. Victoria immediately became quiet. Charles kissed her on the cheek. Everything all right? She nodded. I'm fine. He smiled. Good. Then he looked at me. Emma, would you mind cleaning the library this afternoon? Of course. Nothing about his voice sounded unusual. But Victoria didn't say another word after he arrived. The library was one of the quietest rooms in the house. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a fireplace, large windows overlooking the lake. As I dusted the shelves, I noticed several folders stacked neatly on a side table. Each one had a printed label. Financial records, medical documents, witness statements. Witness statements? My pulse quickened. Why would a divorce require witness statements? Just then, I heard footsteps. I stepped away from the table. Charles entered the library. He didn't realize I was still inside. His phone rang. He answered immediately. Rebecca? Silence. No, she suspects nothing. Another pause. I need stronger evidence. He listened, then quietly replied, If the court believes she's unfaithful, everything becomes easier. Court. Evidence. Unfaithful. Every rumor suddenly started making sense. Charles wasn't defending himself against accusations. He was creating them. He ended the call and walked out. I remained frozen behind one of the bookshelves. For the first time, I no longer wondered whether Victoria was innocent. I knew she was, but I still didn't know why Charles was doing this. The answer came 3 days later. It happened completely by accident. Victoria had gone to a fundraising luncheon. Charles was at work. Only Ethan was home. He was searching for an old family photo album. I helped him move several storage boxes from the attic. One box fell. Dozens of papers scattered across the floor. As we gathered them, Ethan picked up an envelope. His expression changed instantly. What is this? Inside were bank documents, property records, corporate ownership papers. He frowned. My mom owns 49% of Dad's firm? He looked genuinely shocked. I thought Dad owned everything. I said nothing. He kept reading, then quietly whispered, "Without Mom's shares, the firm doesn't exist." At that moment, everything became clear. This wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about another relationship. Victoria wasn't standing between Charles and another woman. She was standing between Charles and control of a company worth tens of millions of dollars. If he convinced the court she had destroyed the marriage through infidelity, he could negotiate from a position of strength, maybe even pressure her into giving up her shares. Suddenly, every fake photograph, every rumor, every whispered conversation had a purpose. This wasn't a broken marriage. It was a carefully planned legal strategy. But Charles had made one mistake. He trusted Rebecca Collins completely. What he didn't know was that Rebecca had already started asking questions of her own, and the truth she was about to uncover would destroy everything Charles had spent months building. For the next several days, I couldn't stop thinking about Rebecca Collins. If Charles was paying her to build a case against Victoria, why hadn't she already finished? The answer came sooner than I expected. The following Wednesday, I arrived at the Hayes house just after 8. Victoria had already left for a meeting. Charles was in court. Only Ethan was home. He looked exhausted. As I cleaned the breakfast room, he walked in carrying his laptop. "Emma," he said quietly, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." He hesitated. "Have you ever believed something for so long that you never thought to question it?" I looked at him. "What happened?" He rubbed his forehead. "I found something in Dad's office." He opened his laptop. I wasn't looking for it. It was already open. On the screen was a spreadsheet. Dozens of names, private investigators, photographers, security companies. Beside each name was a payment. Every payment had the same description: case preparation. At the bottom of the page was Rebecca Collins' name. The amount beside it was larger than all the others. Ethan slowly closed the laptop. "My dad has been paying people for almost a year." Neither of us spoke. Then he quietly asked, "What kind of husband is that?" I had no answer. The next morning, something happened that Charles never planned for. Rebecca arrived earlier than usual. Instead of going directly to Charles' office, she walked into the kitchen. Victoria was making coffee. For several seconds, they simply looked at each other. Then Rebecca spoke. "Mrs. Hayes, may we talk?" Victoria looked confused. "Of course." They disappeared into the sunroom. The conversation lasted almost an hour. When they came out, Victoria was crying. Rebecca wasn't. She looked determined. As Rebecca walked toward the front door, she stopped beside me. For a second, it seemed like she wanted to say something. Instead, she quietly whispered, "Some lies become too big to live with." Then she left. 2 days later, the truth exploded. Not through gossip, not through social media, through lawyers. Charles came home that afternoon looking unusually confident. He placed a thick folder on the dining room table. "We need to talk." Victoria, Ethan, Lily, all three sat down. I was cleaning the living room nearby, close enough to hear every word. Charles opened the folder. "I've filed for divorce." No one spoke. He slid several photographs across the table. The same photographs the town had been talking about for months. Victoria and an unknown man. Dinner, a hug, a hotel entrance. Charles folded his hands calmly. "I think it's time everyone knows the truth." Lily burst into tears. Ethan stared silently at the photographs. Victoria didn't even look down. Instead, she looked directly at her husband. Then she asked one question. "Are you finished?" Charles smiled. "I believe so." Victoria slowly reached into her handbag. She removed another folder, thicker than his. She placed it on the table. "I'd like everyone to see mine." Charles stopped smiling. Victoria opened the folder. Inside were invoices, emails, contracts, bank transfers, private investigator reports, photographers' receipts, phone records, every payment Charles had made, every instruction he had given, every fake photograph that had been staged. Then came the final document, a signed agreement between Charles Hayes and Rebecca Collins. Rebecca had never been his girlfriend. She had never been helping him prove Victoria was unfaithful. She had been hired as a licensed investigator. Her job had been to find evidence of an affair. Instead, she documented something completely different. Months of manipulation, fabricated evidence, witness coaching, deliberate attempts to destroy Victoria's reputation before filing for divorce. Lily looked at her father. "You did this?" Charles didn't answer. Ethan slowly pushed his chair back. "You lied to us." Still no answer. Victoria quietly slid one final envelope across the table. "This arrived yesterday." Charles opened it. His face turned white. Rebecca had resigned. She had submitted every document directly to Victoria's attorney, along with a sworn affidavit explaining how Charles had pressured her to build a false narrative. The room became completely silent. For the first time since I'd met Charles, he had no words. The divorce lasted less than 5 months. The court rejected every allegation against Victoria. The fabricated evidence became part of the public record. Charles's reputation collapsed almost overnight. Several major clients left his firm. The State Bar Association opened an ethics investigation. Within a year, he resigned from the company he had spent decades building. Victoria kept her ownership share. Ethan left his father's firm and started working with another attorney. Lily spent months rebuilding her relationship with her mother. The hardest part wasn't forgiving. It was accepting how easily they had believed the lie. Several months later, Victoria invited me to lunch, not as her housekeeper, as a friend. Before I left, she said something I still think about. "People assume betrayal begins with an affair." She smiled sadly. "But sometimes the real betrayal is convincing everyone you love that you're the victim." I nodded. Because after everything I had witnessed, I knew she was right. People rarely destroy families with one dramatic mistake. More often, they destroy them with hundreds of small lies, repeated long enough until everyone mistakes them for the truth.